I never imagined that the day would come when everything I believed about my family would shatter into irreparable fragments. Growing up, I always considered my older brother, Marcus, to be the golden child, a paragon of success, charm, and unwavering integrity. Our parents showered him with praise at every opportunity, their eyes alight with pride whenever he returned from one of his countless achievements. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, always lurking in his imposing shadow, struggling to find my own place in a family where excellence was measured solely by his feats. I worked hard, I tried to be good, but nothing ever seemed to measure up to the perfection they projected onto him. I married Lena in a small, unassuming ceremony that felt intimate and true. Lena was the calm in my otherwise turbulent life, her laughter was gentle and genuine, and her eyes held a quiet depth that made me believe in the goodness of everyday life. In the beginning, everything was blissful. We built a life together filled with small joys, morning coffee shared in silence, whispered dreams on starry nights, and plans for a future that seemed as bright as the midday sun. Even as I struggled with my own insecurities about living in Marcus's long, unwavering spotlight, Lena became my sanctuary, someone who believed in me unconditionally even when the rest of the world seemed to celebrate someone else. For years, I remained oblivious to the subtle changes that began to ripple through our lives. At first, they were mere hints, a lingering glance when Marcus thought I wasn't looking, a secretive smile shared between him and Lena when I walked into a room. I chalked these up to coincidences, to the eccentricities of human interaction, never suspecting that beneath the veneer of familial admiration and marital contentment, betrayal was slowly taking root. It was as if the world had subtly realigned itself into a dark undercurrent that no one dared acknowledge. I started noticing the little things, Lena's phone, once an open book filled with everyday messages, now guarded by a new passcode. The way Marcus's compliments would sometimes come with an odd, almost imperceptible edge of knowingness, and the way our parents, who had always sung his praises in a tone of unquestionable admiration, began to exchange furtive glances over dinner when the conversation strayed too close to matters of the heart. At first, I tried to dismiss these feelings as the product of an overactive imagination, a manifestation of my own self-doubt and lingering insecurities. I convinced myself that perhaps I was simply projecting my inner fears onto them, that my mind was concocting scenarios of betrayal out of thin air. It was during a seemingly ordinary family dinner that the first undeniable cracks in our carefully constructed facade began to widen. The dining room was filled with the usual warmth of familial conversation, our parents beaming with pride over Marcus's latest promotion at his prestigious job. They recounted his every success with such fervor that it seemed as if the air itself vibrated with their admiration. I sat quietly at the table, Lena by my side, trying to share in their joy even as a cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. I remember glancing at Lena, hoping to see reassurance in her eyes, but instead, I found something I couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by a forced smile. I told myself it was nothing, that I was merely overthinking things. Over the next several months, the dissonance between appearances and reality grew more pronounced. I began to find messages on Lena's phone that I wasn't meant to see, an exchange of words that seemed too intimate, too secretive, between her and Marcus. My heart pounded every time I caught a glimpse of their names together, hidden in text threads that I knew I shouldn't have looked at. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The man my parents adored, the man whose every achievement was celebrated as a beacon of honor in our family, was entwined in a betrayal so profound it threatened to unravel everything I held dear. I remember the day I confronted Lena vividly. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that matched the tumult within me. I found her in our study, seated at the desk with a letter spread out before her. The soft murmur of rain on the window was the only sound as I approached her, my heart thundering in my chest. I asked her, voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief, about the messages I had seen. For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and oppressive, as if the room itself was bracing for the storm to come. Finally, her eyes met mine, and I saw in them a maelstrom of sorrow and guilt. She confessed in halting whispers that what I had suspected was true, that she and Marcus had been involved in a secret affair for months. The world around me ceased to exist as I absorbed her words. My mind, a whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief, struggled to comprehend the enormity of the revelation. How could the person I had vowed to love and cherish, who had been my partner in life's quiet journey, betray me in such a profound way? And how could Marcus, my own flesh and blood, the man whose successes had always been a source of pride for our family, stoop to such treachery? The lines between right and wrong blurred into an unbearable haze as I grappled with a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. In the days that followed, I felt as though I was living in a waking nightmare. Each moment was laced with the painful irony of a family that had once reveled in Marcus's unblemished image now confronted with the stark reality of his deception. Our parents, who had long placed him on a pedestal, seemed utterly devastated by the news. I could see it in their eyes, in the way their smiles faltered and in the hushed tones of disbelief that replaced their once proud proclamations. They struggled to reconcile the image of the successful, honorable son they had always known with the man who had betrayed his own brother by stealing from the sanctity of my marriage. The days turned into weeks, each one marked by endless conversations, tearful confrontations, and the slow, agonizing process of unmasking the lies that had so thoroughly poisoned our family. I withdrew into a shell of solitude, haunted by memories of happier times, dinners filled with laughter, family gatherings where Marcus's accomplishments were the centerpiece of every conversation, and the belief that our family was unassailable. I found myself questioning everything. Was our bond truly unbreakable? Had I been so blinded by admiration and love that I had overlooked the warning signs that lay hidden beneath the surface? Lena tried to explain herself, offering apologies that seemed both sincere and desperately inadequate. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling isolated in a marriage that she claimed no longer fulfilled her. She confessed that Marcus had been the one who understood her, who made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced before. But each word she uttered only deepened the wound, a wound that I knew would take years, if ever, to fully heal. The betrayal was not just the act itself, but the erosion of trust that had been the foundation of everything I had believed in. In the quiet aftermath, I began to piece together the sequence of events that led to this devastating fracture. It started with small, almost imperceptible shifts, a glance that lingered too long, a gentle touch that seemed more affectionate than necessary, and conversations that took place in hushed tones when I was not around. There were nights when I would lie awake, haunted by a nagging sense that something was amiss, only to be lulled back to sleep by the routine of everyday life. I had been so engrossed in the minutiae of survival, of keeping our lives running as normally as possible, that I had missed the signs until they converged into an undeniable truth. I remember a particular evening when the weight of the secret became too much to bear. I had been sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at a television that offered no comfort, when a sudden knock at the door shattered the silence. It was my mother, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, clutching a letter in her trembling hands. In a voice choked with emotion, she read aloud the contents, a confession from Marcus, a confession of a love that was never meant to be, of a passion that had spiraled out of control, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts and shattered illusions. I could hardly process the words as they tumbled out, each one a dagger to the already wounded heart of our family. The confession was as raw as it was unequivocal. Marcus admitted that he had succumbed to a temptation that had long festered in the shadows, a temptation that had found a willing partner in Lena. There was no attempt to justify his actions, no feeble plea for understanding. It was simply an unvarnished truth, laid bare before a family that had once revered him as a model of virtue and success. My parents, who had once celebrated his every achievement, now looked upon him with eyes that brimmed with a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and a profound sense of betrayal. In that moment, the foundation upon which our family had been built crumbled irreparably. As I stood there, caught between a surge of anger and an overwhelming sadness, I realized that the betrayal went far beyond the realm of infidelity. It was a violation of the sacred bonds of family, a betrayal that twisted the very notion of trust into something unrecognizable and grotesque. The man I had once called my brother, the man whose successes had been a constant source of pride, had turned his back on everything that we had all held dear. And in doing so, he had not only shattered my marriage but had also fractured the delicate equilibrium of a family that had been built on the fragile illusion of perfection. The following days were a blur of whispered arguments, tearful confrontations, and painful silences that spoke louder than any words ever could. I wandered through the halls of our family home as if I were a ghost, haunted by the memories of a past that now seemed like a distant dream. Lena's presence, once a source of comfort, now served as a constant reminder of the betrayal, a betrayal that I wasn't sure I could ever truly forgive. Yet, even in the midst of my anguish, I found myself questioning the nature of love and loyalty. Had I been too blind, too trusting? Was it possible that I, too, had played a part in this tragic unraveling, by ignoring the subtle signs until it was too late? There were moments, in the stillness of the night, when I would find myself reliving every interaction, every whispered word, and every secret smile that had led up to the revelation. I'd lie awake, questioning the authenticity of every memory I held dear, wondering if there had been any point when I could have stopped this relentless descent into betrayal. The more I pondered, the deeper the abyss of despair grew, until I found myself teetering on the edge of an emotional precipice from which there seemed to be no escape. In those long, solitary hours, I began to write down my thoughts, trying to capture the raw, unfiltered truth of what I was experiencing. The act of writing became both an exorcism and a desperate plea for clarity, a way to untangle the complex web of emotions that now defined my existence. I poured my heart onto the pages, recounting every moment of joy and every painful memory with an honesty that frightened me. Through my words, I sought to reclaim a semblance of control, to transform the chaos of my emotions into something tangible, something that could perhaps one day be understood. I was painfully aware that nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal had created a chasm between the past and the present, a void filled with unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. Yet, amidst the overwhelming darkness, there flickered a fragile ember of determination. I realized that if I were to survive this betrayal, if I were to rebuild the remnants of a life that had been torn asunder, I would need to find a way to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. It was a daunting prospect, one that required me to face not only the betrayal of my brother and wife but also the vulnerabilities within myself that had allowed such deceit to take root. In the early days that followed the revelation, I retreated into myself, seeking solace in the quiet corners of solitude. I spent long hours wandering the empty streets at night, my thoughts as dark and unyielding as the starless sky above. In those moments, I wrestled with the enormity of the loss of trust, the loss of the illusions I had clung to for so long, and, most acutely, the loss of a future that now seemed irreparably tainted by betrayal. I questioned everything I had ever believed about loyalty, about love, about the very nature of human connection. The journey ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and every step I took was fraught with the risk of stumbling deeper into despair. Yet even as I grappled with these overwhelming emotions, I knew that I could not remain lost in the labyrinth of my own anguish forever. There was a part of me, a quiet, resilient voice buried deep within, that insisted on the possibility of redemption, of healing, even in the aftermath of such profound betrayal. I began to search for small pockets of hope in the midst of the wreckage, a kind word from a friend, the gentle embrace of a long-forgotten memory, or the unexpected comfort found in the rhythm of everyday life. These moments, however fleeting, served as reminders that even the deepest wounds could one day begin to mend. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a future that is as uncertain as it is inevitable, I realize that the process of healing is a long and arduous journey, one that demands not only forgiveness but also an unflinching commitment to confronting the truths that have haunted me for so long. I have begun to understand that the betrayal of Marcus and Lena is not a singular event, but rather a culmination of small betrayals, silent acquiescences, and overlooked warnings. Each of these fragments has left an indelible mark on my soul, a scar that I will carry with me always. I know that the road ahead will be filled with painful memories and moments of unbearable vulnerability. I know that there will be days when the weight of the past threatens to crush me entirely. But I also know that, in order to move forward, I must embrace the pain, not as a burden to be borne in silence, but as a catalyst for transformation. The truth of what has happened cannot be erased, but it can be integrated into the fabric of my life, a part of a narrative that, while marred by betrayal, also holds the promise of renewal. So here I am, on the precipice of a new chapter, a chapter that is still being written, fraught with uncertainty and laced with the bittersweet sting of loss. I will continue to seek out the light in the darkness, to find meaning in the midst of chaos, and, above all, to reclaim my identity from the ruins of what once was. This is not a tale of unending sorrow, but rather the beginning of a journey toward understanding, toward healing, and, eventually, toward forgiveness. Even if that forgiveness is not for Marcus or Lena, perhaps one day it will be for myself. And so, as I take my first tentative steps into this unknown future, I cling to the hope that even the deepest betrayals can give birth to the strongest transformations. Every day, I am learning that life is not defined solely by the betrayals we endure, but by the courage we muster in the face of adversity, the unyielding determination to rise again, to find beauty amidst the scars, and to rebuild a life that, despite its fractures, remains worth living. The journey is long, and the road is treacherous, but I am resolved to walk it, one painstaking step at a time, until I can finally say that I have reclaimed the fragments of my shattered heart and forged them into something resilient, something true. As I close my eyes tonight, I do so with a heart heavy with grief yet ignited by a fragile spark of determination, a promise to myself that no matter how many times I fall, I will rise again, stronger and more whole than before. I know not what tomorrow holds, but I am ready to face it, armed with the raw truth of my own experience and the steadfast belief that, in time, even the deepest wounds may begin to heal. I spent the following days in a state of restless disbelief, as if the very fabric of my life had been torn apart and strewn across a vast, unrecognizable landscape. Every moment seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute saturated with the raw, unfiltered pain of betrayal. I couldn't escape the constant echo of Lena's trembling confession or the memory of my brother's once-admired smile now marred by guilt. In the quiet hours of early morning, when the world was still shrouded in darkness, I found myself wandering through our empty house, each room a stark reminder of the life that once was, a life built on trust, admiration, and the unwavering belief in family bonds. The first few days after the revelation were a chaotic blur. I avoided my parents, unable to meet their eyes as they, too, were grappling with the shocking disintegration of the idealized image they had so carefully constructed over the years. Their voices, which once resonated with unyielding pride as they recounted Marcus's accomplishments, now faltered in the presence of a secret too painful to acknowledge. I recalled the strained silence at dinner that evening, punctuated only by the sound of cutlery clinking against plates, each small noise echoing like a distant memory of happier times. I felt abandoned even in their midst, isolated by a grief so deep that it rendered the familiar world almost alien. In the midst of this turmoil, I struggled to reconcile the conflicting images of my brother. Growing up, Marcus had always been the shining beacon in our family, a person who effortlessly garnered accolades and admiration. Yet, as I began to sift through the fragments of deceit, I realized that his carefully curated image was nothing more than a facade. The man who had once been the embodiment of success was now revealed as someone capable of unspeakable betrayal. I found myself re-examining every interaction from the past, the seemingly innocuous compliments, the fleeting moments of shared glances between him and Lena that I had dismissed as mere familial affection, the subtle undercurrents that now took on a sinister hue. It was as if every cherished memory was tainted by the specter of his duplicity. Lena, too, became a focal point of my inner torment. I oscillated between feelings of deep love and profound disillusionment, caught in the crossfire of my shattered expectations. I remembered the gentle way she used to smile at me, the warmth of her hand in mine, and the unspoken promise of unwavering loyalty that had once been the foundation of our union. Now, however, her eyes held a sorrow so profound that I wondered if she, too, was a victim of her own choices. In the quiet of our shared bedroom, the silence was deafening, filled with unspoken accusations and the weight of broken vows. I often found myself staring at the emptiness of the night, questioning whether the dreams we had once woven together were mere illusions, destined to dissolve under the harsh light of reality. In the days that followed, I attempted to navigate this new, jagged existence by seeking solace in routine. I took long, solitary walks through the city, where the rhythmic cadence of my footsteps provided a temporary distraction from the internal chaos. Each step was a battle against the urge to collapse into despair, and every familiar street corner seemed to whisper memories of the past, a past that now felt irretrievably lost. I found myself lingering at the old park where, as a child, I had learned to ride my bike. The sight of families laughing together and the sound of carefree chatter stirred conflicting emotions within me. For a brief moment, I was reminded that life continued unabated, indifferent to the personal tragedies unfolding in its midst. It was during one of these solitary journeys that I encountered an old friend, someone who had known me long before the intricate web of betrayal and shattered trust had ensnared my life. His presence was unexpectedly comforting, like a lifeline tossed to a drowning man. We sat on a weathered bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches reaching skyward as if in silent supplication. Over the course of several hours, we spoke in hushed tones about the past, the present, and the uncertain future. He listened intently, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding born of his own hardships. In his gentle reassurances, I found the faintest glimmer of hope, a reminder that, even in the midst of devastation, there remained the possibility of rediscovery and healing. Yet, despite these small moments of solace, the pervasive sense of betrayal continued to haunt me. The tension in our family home grew ever more palpable. My parents, once the epitome of unconditional love and unwavering support, now moved through the days in a daze of disbelief and sorrow. I remember one particularly bitter evening when I returned home to find them seated in the living room, their faces etched with lines of anguish and regret. They spoke in low, tentative voices about the shattered ideals of family honor and the disintegration of trust that had once bound us together. Their sorrow was not directed solely at Marcus, but at the collective failure of our family unit, a failure that now seemed to resonate in every hollow corner of our home. As the days turned into weeks, I realized that the healing process was far from linear. There were moments of fierce, burning anger, days when the urge to confront both Marcus and Lena grew almost overwhelming. I had imagined countless scenarios in which I would demand answers, where the facade would crumble entirely under the weight of my own fury. But every time I mustered the strength to face them, I found myself paralyzed by a mixture of fear, uncertainty, and the lingering hope that perhaps, somewhere deep within, there still lay a remnant of the family I once cherished. I became acutely aware of the delicate balance between seeking retribution and striving for a semblance of forgiveness, a balance that seemed as elusive as a mirage in a barren desert. In an effort to make sense of the chaos, I began documenting my thoughts in a battered journal. Every word, every line was a desperate attempt to capture the swirling tempest of emotions that threatened to engulf me. I wrote of the betrayal, of the overwhelming sense of loss, and of the slow, painful process of piecing together the fragments of a life that now felt irreparably fractured. The act of writing became a form of catharsis, a way to externalize the tumult within and perhaps, in time, to find a measure of understanding amid the ruins. I scribbled notes late into the night, each entry a raw, unfiltered outpouring of the heartache that had become my constant companion. Amidst this internal battle, the world outside continued unabated. I forced myself to attend work, to engage in the daily rituals of a life that now seemed surreal. Colleagues offered sympathetic glances and gentle words of support, but none of their assurances could penetrate the fortress of isolation I had built around my wounded heart. I found it increasingly difficult to mask the pain, to maintain the veneer of normalcy required by a society that prized success and stoicism. Every interaction was tinged with the knowledge of a secret that I carried, a secret that threatened to unravel the very fabric of my existence at any moment. One rainy afternoon, as I sat alone in a small, dimly lit cafe, I was approached by a stranger whose eyes held an inexplicable kindness. He asked if I was all right, his voice gentle and unassuming. In that brief moment of connection, I felt the weight of isolation begin to lift, if only slightly. We talked about trivialities, the weather, the mundane routines of daily life, but in his presence, I was reminded that there were still compassionate souls in the world, still individuals who understood the quiet, unspoken language of pain. His unexpected empathy was a salve for my battered spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, human connection had the power to heal, if only imperceptibly. Yet, even as I encountered these fleeting moments of understanding, the internal strife continued unabated. I began to notice a subtle shift in my own perceptions, a slow but undeniable transformation in the way I viewed the world around me. The betrayal had forced me to confront truths I had long denied, that the people I loved were fallible, that the ideals of perfection were nothing more than illusions, and that the path to healing was paved with both pain and the courage to face it head-on. I started to see that the journey toward forgiveness was not a linear progression from despair to hope, but a winding, tumultuous road marked by setbacks and small victories, by moments of crushing grief interspersed with flashes of resilience. The weeks that followed were a mosaic of conflicting emotions. Some days, I found myself overwhelmed by a sense of numb detachment, as if the heartache had finally dulled to a constant, persistent ache, a dull throb in the background of every waking moment. On other days, I was seized by an almost violent determination to reclaim what I had lost, to confront the betrayal with a fierce resolve that surprised even me. There were nights when I would lie awake, haunted by dreams that blurred the line between past and present, a nightmarish montage of whispered secrets, shattered promises, and the cold, unyielding gaze of a brother I once admired. In one particularly turbulent evening, when the storm outside seemed to echo the chaos within, I found myself standing before a mirror, searching for the person I used to be. The reflection that stared back was worn and haggard, marked by deep lines of sorrow and the faint traces of a smile that had long since faded. I asked myself if I could ever reclaim the innocence and hope that had once defined me, or if the scars of betrayal were destined to be a permanent part of my identity. The question lingered in the silence, a haunting refrain that underscored the bitter reality of my existence. Amid the relentless internal conflict, I began to see hints of transformation, small, almost imperceptible signs that perhaps the journey toward healing was not entirely futile. I found myself drawn to quiet moments of introspection, where the chaos of the day gave way to a contemplative silence. In these moments, I would revisit the pages of my journal, rereading the raw entries that captured the unvarnished truth of my emotions. There, in the ink-stained lines and scattered thoughts, I discovered a fragile thread of resilience, a subtle acknowledgement that even in the depths of despair, there lay the possibility of rebirth. It was during one of these introspective sessions that I began to confront a long-buried truth, that the pain inflicted by betrayal, as excruciating as it was, could also serve as a catalyst for personal growth. The journey toward forgiveness, I realized, was not about absolving those who had hurt me, but about reclaiming my own sense of dignity and self-worth. Each day became a silent promise, a vow to honor my pain, to let it guide me toward a deeper understanding of who I was and who I could become. Gradually, I found that the very act of facing my inner demons allowed me to reclaim a semblance of control. I started to rebuild my life one small step at a time, reaching out to old friends, rediscovering hobbies that had once brought me joy, and even daring to dream of a future unburdened by the past. The process was painstaking and fraught with setbacks, yet each step forward was a quiet rebellion against the despair that threatened to consume me. In the midst of this arduous journey, I began to perceive the betrayal not solely as an irreparable wound, but as a transformative experience that, in time, might forge a stronger, more resilient version of myself. Still, there were moments when the memory of that fateful day, when everything changed, would surge forth with overwhelming force. I would be caught off guard, a familiar song on the radio, a stray comment in conversation, and suddenly, the walls I had built to protect myself would tremble, letting in a cascade of painful recollections. In those vulnerable instances, I allowed myself the necessary grief, shedding tears that were both a release and a testament to the depths of my loss. I learned that vulnerability was not a sign of weakness, but a necessary step on the long, winding road toward healing. As the days turned into months, I began to understand that the journey toward restoration was as much about embracing the present as it was about reconciling with the past. I sought to redefine my identity, not as the betrayed husband or the disillusioned brother, but as an individual capable of rising above the wreckage of shattered ideals. I discovered strength in the quiet moments of reflection, in the steady cadence of everyday life, and in the unexpected kindness of strangers who, like me, had weathered their own storms of heartache. There were still many unanswered questions, the reasons behind the betrayal, the hidden fractures in our family that had allowed such deceit to take root, and the elusive path to genuine forgiveness. Yet, with each passing day, I felt the burden of the past lighten ever so slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism that perhaps, in time, the pain could evolve into a source of wisdom and renewed purpose. I was learning to live with the scars, to view them not as symbols of defeat but as emblems of survival, proof that even the deepest wounds could eventually give way to hope. Now, as I stand at the threshold of another day, I carry with me the lessons of these turbulent weeks, a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit. The betrayal, as raw and agonizing as it was, has irrevocably altered my perception of love, loyalty, and trust. Yet, in the crucible of this pain, I have discovered that the path to healing is not paved solely with bitterness and regret, but with the courage to face one's deepest vulnerabilities and to emerge, however imperfectly, renewed. The road ahead remains uncertain, filled with both the specter of past wounds and the promise of unforeseen light, but I am resolved to walk it, one determined, trembling step at a time. And so, as the rain finally gives way to a hesitant dawn, I find myself quietly embracing the paradox of my own existence, a life marked by betrayal and sorrow, yet buoyed by the unyielding spark of hope that persists even in the darkest moments. In the interplay between loss and resilience, I have come to understand that every scar carries a story, every tear a lesson, and every moment of despair an opportunity to rebuild. With each passing day, I edge closer to reclaiming my identity from the ruins of shattered trust, forging a future that, while forever altered, remains undeniably my own. I felt as though I had reached the end of a dark tunnel, though the exit was bathed in a light that was both blinding and uncertain. The days that followed brought me face to face with the raw reality of a life transformed beyond recognition. I began to understand that the journey toward healing was not a single event, but a continuous process of dismantling old defenses and building new bridges from the shattered remnants of trust. Every morning, as I woke to a world that seemed both hauntingly familiar and utterly foreign, I felt the weight of each past betrayal settle upon my shoulders like an inescapable shroud. Yet, even as the memories pressed in, I discovered that there existed within me an ember of resilience, a stubborn refusal to be defined solely by the pain I had endured. It was during one of these early mornings, as pale light seeped through the curtains and illuminated the quiet devastation of our home, that I resolved to confront the fractured bonds that had once held our family together. I knew that I could not simply erase the past, nor could I pretend that the wounds would vanish with time alone. Instead, I had to face the people who had been both my greatest support and my deepest betrayal. In a moment of uncharacteristic resolve, I invited my parents and even, against my better judgment, reached out to Marcus. I wanted answers, not for the sake of vengeance, but to understand how the perfect image they had so lovingly constructed could shatter so completely. The confrontation took place in the living room, a space that had once echoed with laughter and now felt like the stage of an unavoidable reckoning. My parents sat with downcast eyes, their expressions a mix of sorrow and disbelief, while Marcus, his once assured demeanor replaced by a heavy sense of regret, avoided my gaze. The silence that followed my first hesitant words was deafening. I asked questions that I had spent countless nights formulating in the solitude of my despair. I demanded to know how Marcus could allow himself to be swayed by his own desires and how Lena, the person who had promised her love and loyalty, could betray the sanctity of our shared life. My voice, though trembling with anger and sorrow, carried an undercurrent of desperation, a plea for some semblance of clarity amidst the chaos. Marcus finally spoke, his tone subdued and riddled with remorse. He admitted that his actions were the result of a series of small compromises, a gradual erosion of his values that had led him down a path he never intended to tread. He confessed that he had felt an insatiable need to be admired, to be seen as more than just the perfect son or the successful brother, and that this hunger had clouded his judgment. He told me that he had believed, for a time, that he could compartmentalize his life, keeping the affair hidden away like a secret stain that would eventually fade. Instead, it had spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. His words did little to soothe the raw edges of my anger, but they did offer a glimpse into a man who was now haunted by the consequences of his actions, a man who realized, too late, that the price of his self-delusion was the loss of everything I had once held dear. Lena, for her part, broke down in a torrent of tears as she tried to explain the loneliness and emptiness that had driven her to seek solace in forbidden arms. She spoke of nights when the silence of our shared home had been unbearable, of the moments when the void between what she expected from our marriage and the reality of our lives became too much to endure. Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush, each sentence laced with a sorrow that seemed to reverberate off the walls. I listened in a state of numb disbelief, feeling every confession as if it were a physical blow. Even as I struggled to process the raw truth of her emotions, I could not shake the overwhelming sense of betrayal, the knowledge that the person I had once trusted implicitly had, in her own way, contributed to the unraveling of our world. In the aftermath of that painful day, the air in our home remained heavy with unsaid words and unresolved tensions. I withdrew into long, silent nights of introspection, my mind reeling with memories that oscillated between the warmth of better days and the icy sting of betrayal. I began to realize that the confrontation, while necessary, was only the beginning of a much longer process. There were no immediate answers, no simple cures for the deep-seated wounds that had been inflicted. I turned once more to my journal, pouring every lingering doubt, every burst of anger, and every tentative hope onto its pages. The act of writing transformed into a meditation, a way to externalize the internal tempest that threatened to engulf me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see subtle changes within myself. The initial fury that had once dominated every thought was gradually giving way to a cautious willingness to accept that the past, with all its imperfections, was an inextricable part of who I was. I started to attend therapy sessions regularly, where I learned that healing was not about forgetting or excusing the actions of those who had hurt me, but about reclaiming my own identity and finding the strength to rebuild from the ruins. The sessions were painful, each revelation was a reminder of the relentless cascade of events that had shattered my life. Yet, with every tear shed and every painful memory revisited, I began to forge a new understanding of myself, a version of me that was no longer defined solely by betrayal, but by the capacity to endure and grow. During this period of soul-searching, I also took tentative steps to distance myself from the remnants of the past. I began to redefine the boundaries of my relationships, not out of bitterness alone, but as a way to safeguard my fragile sense of self. I reconnected with old friends who had remained steadfast through the years, and I sought out new experiences that allowed me to see beyond the narrow confines of my previous existence. I took up painting, a hobby I had abandoned in the wake of the turmoil, and found solace in the simple act of splashing colors onto a blank canvas. Each brushstroke was a silent rebellion against the darkness, a way to assert that beauty could still emerge from chaos. There were moments, too, when I felt the pull of isolation, when the ghosts of betrayal would rise unbidden and the memories would seem too overwhelming to bear. In those moments, I would retreat into the quiet sanctuary of my solitude, allowing myself to grieve without the pressure to appear strong. I learned that vulnerability was not a sign of defeat, but a necessary ingredient in the long, arduous journey toward self-reclamation. I allowed myself to feel every emotion in full measure, the anger, the sorrow, the despair, and, slowly, I began to understand that each tear shed was a step toward releasing the hold that the past had on me. Over time, I noticed a change in the dynamics of our family as well. My parents, once consumed by their own grief and shock, began to confront the reality of their own roles in the unraveling. Their blind admiration for Marcus had, in their own way, contributed to an environment where the truth could be so easily obscured. I witnessed them grappling with their own feelings of guilt and regret, and while their sorrow did not absolve the betrayal, it did create a space where honest conversation could eventually take root. Slowly, we began to have difficult, honest discussions, about responsibility, about the consequences of unchecked expectations, and about the ways in which each of us had been complicit, in some manner, in the narrative that had led to this devastating moment. It was not a smooth road by any means. The journey toward forgiveness, if forgiveness could ever be fully attained, was littered with setbacks and moments of despair. There were days when the pain would return with a vengeance, when every reminder of the past felt like a fresh wound. Yet, even in the midst of those relapses into grief, I found that the newfound strength I had cultivated served as a buffer against complete collapse. I began to see that the process of healing was cyclical, a series of peaks and valleys, where each descent into sorrow was followed by a slow, tentative ascent toward hope. In one particularly quiet evening, as I sat alone on the back porch watching the twilight surrender to the night, I found myself reflecting on the nature of betrayal and forgiveness. The cool breeze carried with it the distant sound of laughter from a neighbor's gathering, a sound that reminded me that life, despite all its imperfections, continued to offer moments of unexpected joy. In that serene moment, I realized that while the scars of the past might never fully disappear, they could transform into symbols of survival, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. I resolved then that I would no longer allow the betrayal to define the entirety of my existence. Instead, I would honor the pain as a catalyst for growth, a reminder of the depths of love and the strength required to rise above despair. As the days turned into months, I found that the act of forgiving was less about absolving those who had wronged me and more about liberating myself from the endless cycle of retribution and regret. I began to see forgiveness as a gift I owed myself, a way to reclaim my inner peace and redefine the narrative of my life. While I could never erase the betrayal, I could choose to let it be a part of my story without allowing it to dictate my future. I started to accept that the path to healing was not linear and that each step, no matter how small, was a victory in its own right. There were still evenings when I would catch a glimpse of Lena or hear Marcus's name in passing, and in those fleeting moments, a rush of old pain would surge through me. But I had learned to anchor myself in the present, to find strength in the now rather than in the ghostly echoes of what had been. I immersed myself in activities that reconnected me with the world beyond the confines of my personal tragedy. I volunteered at a local community center, finding unexpected solace in the shared struggles of others. In listening to their stories and sharing my own, I discovered that the human experience was a tapestry of intertwined sorrows and joys, and that, in our vulnerability, we found a collective strength. Now, as I look back on the tumultuous path that brought me to this place of tentative acceptance, I feel a bittersweet gratitude for the lessons learned along the way. I have come to understand that betrayal, while it can shatter the foundation of trust, also has the power to ignite a transformation so profound that it reshapes every facet of who we are. I am no longer the man defined solely by the wounds of yesterday. I am a man who has embraced his scars as symbols of endurance, a testament to the capacity of the human spirit to evolve, to forgive, and ultimately, to love again. In the quiet solitude of my new routine, I write these words as both a confession and a declaration, a promise to myself that I will continue to rise, even when the world around me seems determined to keep me down. I have learned that the journey toward healing is ongoing, a daily battle fought in moments of introspection, vulnerability, and, yes, even anger. But in every challenge, there is a seed of hope waiting to be nurtured, a spark that can, over time, kindle a flame of resilience. As I close another day with a sense of hard-won peace, I know that I will carry the memories of betrayal with me always. They will serve as reminders of the past, a past that, while painful, has shaped me into the person I am today. And though the scars may never fully fade, they no longer dictate my future. Instead, they have become the foundation upon which I build a life of newfound strength, purpose, and cautious optimism. In the soft murmur of the night, as I prepare to rest and welcome another uncertain tomorrow, I take solace in the simple truth that healing is not an endpoint, but a journey, a winding road filled with moments of despair, fleeting glimpses of hope, and the ever-present promise of renewal. I have chosen to embrace this journey, to let each step forward be a testament to the indomitable will to survive and to transform pain into a source of strength. And so, with a heart that still bears the marks of betrayal yet beats with the quiet determination of a survivor, I take a deep breath, ready once again to face whatever comes next.